Hey, good afternoon. Scott Luton and Greg White back with you on Supply Chain Now. Welcome back to the show. On today's episode, we're really excited about our guest here today. We were interviewing an industry leader that is making it happen in supply chain, in particular from a supplier development and diversification standpoint. So stay tuned as we look to increase your supply chain leadership IQ. Greg, excited about today's episode. What about you?
I am excited. I didn't get to join you in Phoenix for this, and you weren't able to meet with David, who we're going to talk to in a second, but you met with Latia Thomas and a number of other folks that are high potential or already participating in supply chain and learning how to employ diversity in your supply chain and sourcing. So Looking forward to it.
Yeah, 9 episodes in about 2.5 days, I think we did in Arizona. And we'll touch on that in a second.
All by yourself, too.
Well, we had some good help from our friend, Mr. Supply Chain and Supply Chain Queen. Daniel and Sherry were both out there. And of course, Paul Noble with Verison, who, David and Paul and Daniel were the ones, while we were out there, able to make the trip. So ton of content, but let's really quick departure from our, we're going to bring in David Burton with DMSCA in a second here, but let's talk about the podcast we published today. So this is a video version of our podcast basically, and we're inviting our viewers basically that if you enjoy this, be sure to check out our podcast wherever they get their podcasts from. Today we featured Dan Reeve, not the football coach, but Dan Reeve with Esker. Fight, Move, Live. Greg, you love this stuff with Dan, huh?
Well, you got to love the fighting spirit that he has. That whole fight, move, live is how to survive in the turns, which is a great term. These difficult times, whatever they may be, certainly now we're talking about COVID-19. But how do you survive these times? And also some practical discussion around how to employ AI. It was just so down to earth and practical that I just felt like it was really, really valuable. Look, one of the things I took away, he didn't say these words, but implied it strongly, is necessity is the mother of invention. And we talked so much about that. I think people will learn a lot from this episode.
Agreed. Absolutely. And you know what? And that's our podcast, right? That we've already published by the time this hits today.
We look so much better on a podcast.
Well, I'm going to tell you this. Today's interview with David Burton, who is founder and president of DMSCA, the Diverse Manufacturing Supply Chain Alliance. Our listeners and our viewers are in for a treat. So with no further ado, let's bring in David. Hey, David, how you doing?
Hey, Scott, how you doing? Hey, Greg, how you doing?
Good.
Great.
We are really excited to have you back. We were talking about the big conference that DMSCA hosted out in beautiful Arizona at the end of February before the world. I mean, the world was changing already, but here in the States, we kind of had this little protected bubble at the time.
We were in a bubble.
That's right. It was a huge bubble, right? But Arizona in late February, it was gorgeous weather. There was so much wonderful feedback around the DMSCA event. We'll talk about that more in a second. And I'll tell you, it was tough to get David's time, Greg. He was like the governor out at this event. I mean, everyone's trying to get a few minutes when he wasn't keynoting or making the panels happen or engaging the attendees. He was getting interviewed or something else. So David, what a great conference.
Yeah, when you make stuff happen, it's hard to get to everybody, and we really appreciate your time, David.
That's right.
Thank you guys for being there. Great. Yeah.
So let's start from the top, David. Before we start talking about DMSCA and even your professional journey, I want to get to know you a little bit better. Let's give our listeners a chance to know you a little better. So tell us about where you grew up and give us an anecdote or two about your upbringing.
Well, I'm a Columbia, South Carolina native. Grew up there, went to high school there. Following high school, I attended Morgan State University, which was then Morgan State College.
All right.
Oh.
And I got a BS in psychology there because I really wanted to be a psychologist. That's what I really wanted to be. But there was this thing called Vietnam going on, and I was a distinguished military graduate. So what that meant is that you are going to go into the Army. And so I was a regular Army commissioned officer, second lieutenant. And I had to make a decision, go to Vietnam, where the expectancy of a second lieutenant, I think at that time was like 23 days.
Wow.
or go to grad school. I said, let me see, that's a hard decision. Let me go to grad school. So like I applied to Harvard in psychology and University of Pennsylvania in city and regional planning, a subject matter which I knew very little about, but Morgan and Penn had an exchange program. But the Army had a timeline, so I had to accept the University of Pennsylvania opening in grad school before Harvard accepted me. But I got locked into city and regional planning because my military order says subject individual will be assigned to University of Pennsylvania to get his degree in city and regional planning. Upon graduation, subject individual will be assigned duties commensurate with his graduate skills. Well, that's where the Army got me there, because I thought I had the Army. Because the funny part about that is I got my degree in city and regional planning. I said, well, the Army would never figure out how to use city planning in the Army, except they had the last laugh, because I was involved in a special operations unit in Vietnam where we had to relocate Montreal villages from VC territory.
Of course. They found a way, right?
They found a way.
Like nature, the Army will find a way.
Wow. Found a way, and therein lies the glitch. So I was in a very special unit, but it was a unit that actually changed my focus on what I really want to do, because I had my degree in city and regional planning before going to the Army. And after that, I returned to the States with the military, 116th Military Assistance Command in Washington, D.C. And I started teaching also at Howard University, planning there. And I got involved in building new communities. Make a long story short, I ended up in new community development. And therein, where I heard from Control Data Corporation that wanted to find someone with my talents and skills to help them build small business incubators around the country. Got involved with Control Data Corporation. I was the guy that went coast to coast to help them put together public and private partnerships to build small business incubators. But while doing that, I saw that there was something missing here, because I saw a real opportunity for incubating manufacturing companies. But I didn't see a lot of resources for that. And when it came to diverse manufacturing companies, I didn't see any organization in the country specifically focused on helping minority manufacturers become more competitive. Right. And the problem there is, at least at that time, manufacturing was a primary source of wealth creation, and there was no organization in the entire country helping diverse suppliers develop a pathway, a course to more and expanded manufacturing. And that led to a pilot initiative, which I began with the South Carolina Manufacturing Extension Partnership. And
David,
that's how we launched it.
If I can ask real quick, during this time, as you were launching this first initiative with the South Carolina manufacturing community, do you feel that there wasn't a ton of incentives for companies to develop diversification programs and get minority owned suppliers into, the matrix, so to speak?
That's a great question. I think, there was the industry of supply diversity was then and still is now an industry focused on diversifying their supply base, to mirror the evolving consumer base.
Yep.
That has always been a very successful ecosystem of affinity organizations. The problem with that is that they call direct suppliers manufacturers, and manufacture direct suppliers for a particular reason. And that is, of all the suppliers in the country from A through Z, manufacturing is the only one that is on the direct side of a financial statement. And what that means is that any dollar of loss, any dollar of value goes straight to the bottom line. Do you lose it or do you add to it? And corporations, from my research, don't take a lot of chances on profit. MROs, non-manufacturing companies, janitorial office supplies, folks like you and I, we are indirect to large corporations.
Right.
It doesn't really matter how much they spend there, but they are not going to lose dollars on that direct side.
Yeah.
And that's what I saw. I saw that the diversity community, while advocating socioeconomic and gender certification as a criteria for engagement in diversity programs, no one was really dealing with what does it really mean to be a direct manufacturer? And that's where companies were not taking a lot of chances. And that's why you didn't see a lot of successful direct supplier or manufacturing supplier diversity efforts early on in today's.
So, gosh, we need several hours to dive into that. Some of that was what Greg and I were talking earlier today on the buzz, in terms of the appetite for risk and innovation and experimentation. And but we'll have to put that aside for this episode. David, before we bring Greg in to kind of talk more about your journey, especially since you kind of brought us up to the point that you were launching your initiative with the South Carolina manufacturing community, I got a quick question. Just on your upbringing side, you grew up in Columbia, South Carolina. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And we've talked before, and we believe we're second or third cousins because I grew up in Aiken, South Carolina.
40 miles away.
That's right. And went to school, even though I'm a Clemson fan, went to school and graduated from South Carolina and spent a bunch of time in Columbia, including my first ever role in the manufacturing community for a family-owned private manufacturer. And enjoyed my time in Columbia. What, when you think about your time growing up in Columbia and different elements of that community, do you ever go back? You still have family in Columbia? What did you miss the most about your upbringing there?
Well, Columbia it's a family-oriented town. I still have family in Columbia, and I go back there quite often. I still have a house there, which I'm, renovating just in case.
Right.
I've expired that. So Columbia is still a precious part of my my home, and so I do go back there quite often. And my daughter is in Charlotte, so she's close by, and have grandkids, and the ex is in Columbia, and so I have a lot of friends there. So Columbia is still home.
Yes.
And,
well, they've done a decent. They've done a really good job. At least I'll defer to the technologist gurus in the room, but they've done a really neat job, which started seemingly with the nanotechnology school there that was affiliated with USC. Of course, the business school is one of the better business schools in the world, of at least the country. And their technology market has really done well in recent years. And Greg, I'm not sure how in tune you are, but Columbia, I think, neat city to live in, but it's becoming more and more a neat city to work in too, right?
It is. It's a great
I have a really important question about Columbia, South Carolina. And Scott knows I'm a foodie, so I have to ask you this, David, to give me some perspective on who you are as a person. Okay. What would you say is your favorite dish at Yesterday's? Do you eat there?
I do not.
Oh, okay. Let me just give you a suggestion. I mean, I know we're all trying to be healthy these days, but it is some of the best chicken fried steak you will ever eat.
Oh, really?
You eat that. Yeah.
Have you been to Columbia?
Oh, yeah. My eldest daughter was a student athlete, and she was being recruited by South Carolina for the swim team. So they were doing so much. First of all, the core part of that campus, and it's very nice and very tight and family, very cozy. It's right next to the Capitol. And then they were building, you guys know the street better than I do. They were sort of revitalizing the street that kind of goes off at an angle towards the stadium.
Yep.
And
Assembly Street.
Assembly,
yes.
Yeah.
Condos and apartments and dorms and whatnot. Man, they were just making that they were completely renewing that whole area. Very impressed by what they're doing in that city.
That's right. Yeah. The Vista was some of the more progressive development. It was kind of ahead of its time in many ways of revitalization. And I'm not sure exactly where all that stands now, but there has been a lot of development in Columbia, both related to the school, which, as you might imagine, is of course a big engine from an ED standpoint, but also independent of the school. So it's been a interesting thing to watch. I graduated in 2000, and it's been really neat to watch over the last 20 years how the city continues to evolve. All right. So no further ado. I didn't mean to take too big of a chapter.
Right? Let's get to work.
That's right. So Greg, I want to bring you in here because I know we're really curious kind of about from where David stopped with his background into kind of moving forward.
I'd just like to go just back just a half a step and make sure we captured everything. So was there any, I mean, we kind of went from, you were in the Army to working with South Carolina manufacturing to discovering this gap and founding DMSCA. Were there other things or other influences or influencers in your life at that time that kind of drove you this direction towards this diverse manufacturing group?
Well, I think, one of the things I probably left out was I mentioned in terms of working with Control Data Corporation in building incubators. Most people may not have heard of Control Data, but at one time it was one of the biggest computer companies in the world.
Right.
I mean, there was IBM, Control Data, Cray, and the Japanese, basically.
Right.
But Control Data, before they went under, the division that I worked in, called City Venture Corporation, was very much oriented towards economic development, utilizing small businesses to build communities. And that was something that Control Data is known for. And so I got a chance to look both at the real estate part of building the facilities that house the business, but also embracing the community that would be supported. So I started my own consultancy after Control Data went under in economic development, economic disparity studies for large banks like Bank of America, Wachovia. I was the guy that worked for them to go out and do disparity studies around the country and to look at the inequities in the lending market. So I got a chance to see something else there I hadn't seen before. And I also was the guy, I started consulting in building small business incubators, and that's what led to the South Carolina MEP. So those things contributed to my getting to the South Carolina MEP. And I think essentially, if you think about it, all DMSCA is now is a virtual incubator.
So real quick for our listeners, when David refers as to the MEP, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, right? And each state has one organization that is that state's partner with the federal government to grow small and medium and help small and medium manufacturers grow. Did I get that right? Or
well, you got exactly right, and that was the issue that I saw. There are about 52 centers around the country. Every state has a manufacturing extension partnership program. They are run differently. Some are run by universities, some are run by nonprofits, some are run by other organizations. But when I looked at that organization, their mandate was to help small and medium-sized businesses increase their productivity and profitability. The next question is, okay, who are they doing that for? When I saw that, I connected with them, and that's why the U.S. Department of Commerce supported the South Carolina project to look at these minority businesses in South Carolina. And that essentially is what led to the formation of what was then the National Minority Manufacturing Institute, but that followed a pilot study at the South Carolina Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which was then extended to a national project to help the National Institute of Standards and Technology take the South Carolina effort and scale it to the national level. And that essentially is when the concept went national. But it was also, to make a long story short, it was also a time when Procter & Gamble, essentially when they were involved with an aspect of my project at the national level, essentially said, well, if you build it, we will come. That is, if you build a national nonprofit organization to replicate this effort and extend this service to the private sector, we will support you in doing that. And that essentially is when Procter & Gamble seeded the beginnings of an organization, which was initially called the National Minority Manufacturing Institute, but it's now called the Diverse Manufacturing Supply Chain Alliance. But that was how this all came together.
Wow. So you sort of spawned a pseudo government initiative, and then out of that, somebody saw value in a private industry initiative, and you described it earlier as an incubator, but I think it's more than that as well. But tell us a little bit about how the incubator aspect of it works and the other aspects of the business, and how DMSCA really helps minority manufacturers or diverse manufacturers to make hay.
Yes. Well, again, the old organization we used to call NEMI, that was another name for it, but it eventually,
NEMI, is that what you call it?
That's what we used to call it.
Yeah.
And it eventually, of course, was.
We give all these letters, and then we give the letters names, right?
Absolutely. So that became DMSCA after we, scale it. But essentially, DMSCA became an organization that was a membership-based organization of suppliers and large corporations. And the focus there, of course, was to bring them together to foster an environment where diverse suppliers could support their initiatives to integrate the manufacturers into their supply chain. The value, of course, there being how they would support large corporations' supply chain cost reduction, performance alliance, innovation, and contribute to their overall resilience. And to do that, I had put together a program called the Corporate Mentoring Program, which procedurally took suppliers through a 5-phase program to help them evolve to a level of competitiveness where they would be able to support large corporations' efforts to integrate them. Because again, now we're trying to integrate diverse suppliers in such a way that they add value to the supply chain. And the only way to do that is to develop suppliers that are performance managed and performance driven. And of course, we've all heard the phrase, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Well, that especially goes true in manufacturing, and especially goes true for manufacturers who compete in supply chains, because not only must they be proficient within their four walls, they also must be proficient in terms of how they relate to their upline customers and their own downline suppliers.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I have to remind suppliers, yes, you're great between your four walls, but are you managing your own suppliers to the same level that you are being managed by your upstream customer? And of course, many suppliers, they're so focused on their own world, their four walls, that they don't understand that they are part of a supply chain, which is why we tell manufacturing suppliers, it's not manufacturing, it's supply chain. You are just a supply chain organization that makes something, but you also have to understand the planning side of it, the sourcing side of it, the delivery side of it, the return side of it, and the technological enabling side of it. If you don't understand those aspects of it, and you're just focused on manufacturing, you may be destined for the long line versus the short line when you engage with your customer.
It's really interesting. I'd like to touch on one aspect that you described, which is your sort of 5-step program, right? That helps get these companies ready to work with major corporations. Frankly, it doesn't matter what kind of small business you are, diverse or whatever the opposite of diverse is. Being a small business puts you at somewhat of a disadvantage in working with larger corporations, because they have very, very specific and sometimes unspoken or expectations of knowing what those requirements are.
Right.
And you surfacing that to those diverse manufacturers helps them get to the next stage much, much more effectively, I imagine.
Well, Scott, if you think about it, there's no such thing as a Department of Supplier Development in corporate America. There's a lot of large corporations made an effort to do that in terms of utilizing their own resources to help suppliers develop. And the automotive industry especially did that, in days gone past. But, when large corporations do that, they are not focused on their own core competencies. So this thing called supply development has to be defined. I say it really has to be put together, because large corporations, when they think of supply development, in many respects, it's not about improving the supplier skills, but looking at how much business can they get. In my world, it's always about process improvement, improving those maturity requirements within the plant, and improving the unique supply chain processes in the supply chain. And until suppliers understand their current state, whether or not it's cross-enterprise maturity or unique supply chains, until they understand their current state and their future state requirements in terms of what's going to be required for competitiveness, they need to understand both of those in order to close a gap. And that gap has to be very strategic, because you don't have enough time nor the resources to improve everything. But you got to improve the right things for the right reason and for the right purpose. And to have a strategy and a roadmap for doing that is really what we have to do at DMSCA, to help suppliers to understand where a supplier's focus can be directed in order to have the greatest return in terms of helping them to build strategic relationships with their customer. And what we do at DMSCA is we try to document and validate the readiness of a supplier's performance and maturity for engagement based on the specific needs of a customer or that customer's industry group. And there's a lot of variation how we do that, but essentially that's what we do. But we have to craft this out of collaboration of three entities: the Supplier Diversity Organization, the Corporate Sourcing and Buying Organization, and of course the suppliers. And they all have to work together collaboratively to conclude successfully in terms of how that supplier must engage with that customer, not just one time, but continuously.
Right.
So this thing called continuous improvement, it has to live in the supply chain. Suppliers have to be able to demonstrate that, not just their supply chain performance metric, but also all the things that go with that in terms of the inside table stakes stuff like quality and financial solvency and things like that.
You're the great translator, I think, of what I from what you've described. I see you as kind of a diplomat / translator that helps these small businesses, these diverse manufacturers, speak the language and understand the language and requirements and culture of these entities with which they want to do business. Is that a fair estimation?
Yes, a fair assessment. And to our corporate members, we owe them a great debt of gratitude, because every corporation is not as focused on developing suppliers as others are, because supply development is a journey. It's not something that's going to take place overnight. And both the supplier and the corporation have to be committed to that journey. We want to generate quick returns for the supplier, of course, in terms of business development, revenue increases. That, of course, is the reason why we're in business. But we also need to understand that it's not going to take place overnight.
Yep.
It has to take place incrementally in steps, strategically taken in steps. And it's that strategy, that supply chain strategy, that has to be developed for the supplier to understand, what do I need to do next, to achieve my business objectives. And together with the corporation's guidance, as they provide input into the corporate mentoring program, the supplier can therefore ensure that they perceive their end goals.
Yeah. All right. So incubator, right, to manufacturers who want to do business, facilitator and translator and diplomat between the corporations that want to do business with these companies. And you have your own event every year. you sound like a busy guy, David. Tell us what it is. How does your day sort of shape up? I think it's probably often when we talk to leaders like you, it's hard for them to understand exactly what you do. It sounds like to me, in some ways, you're head chef and bottle washer at the same time. So tell us a little bit about what's a day in the life of David Burton.
Always trying to improve what I think is already a good process. I mentioned that we use 3 buzzwords for developing DMSCA. They were align, collaborate, and achieve. We're placing emphasis now on the collaboration part first. So I'm always looking at ways, how can I foster more collaboration between suppliers and their customers? How can I bring about a collaborative relationship early in the process to provide suppliers with early ROI in their engagement? And how can that lead to performance alignment, maturity alignment, so that we can accelerate, the business development of the supplier? So to answer your question, I spent a lot of time looking at not where things are today, but trying to get a sense of where they're going tomorrow, because supply chains are moving so fast. They're maturing in such a way that what was competitive last year may not be competitive next year. And with COVID-19,
especially in these times, yeah,
you're going to have an acceleration of supply chain digitalization practices, such as predictive analytics, and there's going to be more of a need to look at how suppliers and corporations collaboratively can help each other remain competitive. I look at the strategies and trends that large corporations have to be considering now in order to ensure supply continuity. And we, as you saw in Scottsdale, we want suppliers to, again, being a little redundant here, to not just focus on how they need to be competitive today, but the investments, the capitalization, the funding requirements, the technical requirements, the workforce and talent acquisition requirements. Because I tell them they've got to have 5 strategies, and we only help you with 2 of those. You got to have an operational cross-enterprise maturity strategy. You got to have a unique supply chain strategy, and you got to have a carbon footprint. Otherwise, don't leave home without it, because everybody wants to know, are you contributing to helping to kill the environment? And fourthly, you got to have a technology enablement strategy. Do you understand predictive analytics? Do you understand how blockchain is going to change everything eventually? Do you really understand how you must prepare for adapting to that? Predictive analytics, cybersecurity, these are things that suppliers need to integrate into their operations now, not tomorrow, now, because when the customer gets there, it's too late for the supplier to adapt.
Right.
The customer is going to expect you to already be there if you're a supplier, not to get ready to be there, but to be there. And by the way, and the last one, this is where we collaborate and partner with other organizations, is talent acquisition and workforce training, because if that was not right, all the above doesn't matter.
That's right. Hiring is the most important thing that you do, right?
Right.
I mean, above your product.
Exactly. Right.
Facilitator of everything.
So you touched on Scottsdale. Obviously, that was the site. Scottsdale, Arizona was the site of the DMSCA conference we attended in late February. And right. If I understand that correct, that is an annual event, right?
Yes.
So I've got some of my favorite takeaways from that conference. I mean, we were busy from post to post, and it was my first DMSCA event. Had a blast. Had 27 pages of notes, a bunch of new friends, a bunch of people I learned from and took insights and perspective from in a variety of sectors, and from students to senior level leaders and all points in between. David, what were some of your favorite moments from the Scottsdale event?
Seeing the collaboration that takes place at a conference like that. Seeing suppliers and corporations collaborate around and talk about things that have been discussed at the conference. Seeing those HBCU students from Morgan State University, which happens to be my alma mater, by the way, present.
And representing well, by the way.
Yeah,
we've interviewed Latia Thomas. Man,
twice
what an
now.
amazing story that she
Absolutely.
had. I don't know if you know her whole story, David, but it's very impressive.
Latia, Aaron, Genoa, and Deirdre. And
absolutely.
4 for 4.
Absolutely. And I'm on the advisory board there at the Morgan State, Earl Gray School of Business there. And they have a great business program and a great supply chain management program. But a lot of HBCUs, they have great programs like that, Howard and many others. So I was glad to see that they were able to articulate their value proposition and potential contribution to that 5th strategy we just talked about, talent acquisition and workforce training. They are the future. And I was so glad to see that the future is in great hands of people like Letitia and others that understand supply chains, that understand that if you're in manufacturing, you've got to understand supply chains, because if you're just in manufacturing and you don't understand supply chains, I repeat myself, you're destined for the long line, not the short line. So I was
well. I mean, we fight this battle every day. It's all supply chain. Whether you're a retailer and you're a merchandiser, or you're a consumer, or you're a manufacturer, anything in between, you are part of the supply chain, right?
Right. So if there's anything good about COVID-19, people have heard about supply chains.
I can quit explaining it to my parents at the dinner table. I feel so much better.
Absolutely. It's given us opportunity to explain ourselves, to understand what the fever is all about. But but those are my high points of the conference. I'm not playing up to you guys, but you guys being there, giving people a chance to really verbalize what they were thinking, because you don't always get those thoughts at a conference. And I learned a lot by going through your interviews that helped me to really further guide the direction of this organization. And I really appreciate that. And
it means a lot coming from you, a trailblazer in so many ways. As you walk us through what you've done, especially for the manufacturing community and the manufacturing industry. And, while I'm sure a lot of your work benefits companies here, but we're talking a global industry. When you innovate here, you touch a lot of places around the world. I'll tell you that I think I was counting earlier. We knocked out 9 podcast interviews over just right around 2 days by the time you look at arrival and departure. And from Farida Ali, the accidental CEO based up in Michigan, to Michelle Morin with Corteva Forever, as she ingrained in my brain to remember how to pronounce that, Corteva AgriScience.
That's Michelle.
To Hannah Kane, who I know is on your board.
Absolutely.
Such a unique interview. I wish I could go through all of these, but Hannah Kane in particular, David, I'm not sure how long y'all known each other, but she's also a trailblazer, and she is a dynamo. So when did y'all two get connected, Hannah Kane and you?
Well, Hannah was one of the first suppliers in the program. She was introduced to the program by Johnson & Johnson years back. And when a person like Hannah sticks with you and helps to make you better as an organization, that's what makes me feel good. The fact that some manufacturers like Hannah, who is one of the best manufacturers in the country, the world, is on my suppliers advisory committee and advisory board. It just helps, because you can't be in this by yourself. It's too big.
Right.
I can't have ears everywhere. I've never run a plant. I've never been responsible for getting inventory out to the customer. But you got to listen to people that do and that understand how change is taking place in their world.
Yep.
And so people like Hannah helps me to integrate those things back into the processes. Hannah and George Hill, Emmett Walker, it's folks like that.
Great board.
I just have a great cast of suppliers who have stuck with me to help me make DMSCA better, and a great cast of corporate members, founding ones like Johnson Johnson, current ones like Abbott and Intel, McCormick,
heavy hitters,
Cummins, and others, and new ones that are looking at us to engage, like Coca-Cola and Cateva and others like that. So I think we're hitting a stride now where organizations are beginning to see, the real value of an organization like DMSCA that's focused on supplier development.
Right.
Because it is a journey, and it has to be fabricated with the interest and commitment of all those engaged.
Agreed. Okay. Yeah. So, and one of the quick highlight, of course, sitting down and spending time with the Morgan State University delegation, sharp group there. Really enjoyed those 2 sessions and some of the follow-up conversations we've had. So appreciate what you do to give forward, as we like to say here. Greg coined that word. Back to your alma mater, Morgan State University. Love the supply chain program they've been building there. All right. So let's move right along. And for the sake of time, David, you've shared so much we could dive into from a kind of a trends and what's taking place in the current state, and for that matter, future state too. But if you had to identify one thing, supply chain related, manufacturing related, or just sheer business related, one thing that you're really keeping your finger on the pulse of, what would that be?
Large corporations, China plus 1, 2, 3 strategies after COVID-19. I think large corporations have they've always understood, but understand even more that they've got to have a China plus 1, 2, 3 strategy. And what that means for me and for DMSCA is, does that mean more domestic manufacturing production? Are they bringing manufacturing closer to home? Are they beginning now to, instead of offshoring, inshoring the manufacturing capabilities and production? I'm looking at that, I'm looking at the trends, and most of all, I'm looking at the hope that diverse manufacturers, especially, are not utilizing this, are not wasting this time,
right,
and are using this time to improve their capabilities and their capacities. Because I think there's going to be a surge of new opportunities for domestic manufacturing suppliers. And I think diverse domestic manufacturing suppliers have to be and must be a big part of that realignment of large corporation supply chain strategy. So those are the things that I'm looking at. I'm looking at how fast will COVID-19, for example, accelerate, as I mentioned earlier in the interview, supply chain digitalization practices and advanced manufacturing practices. And that said, I'm also looking at, will diverse suppliers waste this opportunity and not move forward in those strategies and integrate those strategies into a cohesive strategy that would not make them just manufacturers, but strategic supply chain organizations that manufacture. And so those are things I look at very closely. And of course, everybody that knows me know that I'm going to get into the word blockchain here somewhere, because I do think blockchain is the next everything. And we aren't there yet, but I think it's going to enable all of us to look at new procurement practices. Like how procurement is going to change in terms of e-commerce practices, and how it's going to really change how suppliers are vetted in supply chains, and to suppliers on the supplier side, how suppliers get paid.
Right. Right. So I'll let Greg weigh in, because I know he's chomping a bit, weigh in on what you were sharing there. But real quick, Mark Manning, Kevin Jackson, speaking of blockchain, I know they're part of your network and your circle, and you've got DMSCA's got some really cool initiatives going on with their organizations and others centered on blockchain and many other technologies. So y'all certainly are not sitting still despite all the gains and success you've had. All right. So Greg, weigh in on blockchain real quick. What's the most important?
Look, it's sort of magic to people, but blockchain is simply an inalterable record.
Right.
It's as simple as that. And an inalterable record creates flawless accountability and much, much more efficient ability to communicate and collaborate. End of discussion. As I often describe the supply chain The supply chain can be as simple as, I want it, you grew it, I'll take it. And everything else in between is a hindrance, a cost, or a delay. And blockchain breaks down hindrances, it reduces costs, and it reduces delays. So it's an inevitable part of supply chain.
I'm gonna have to go out and buy one of these blockchains. Can we get it Ace Hardware or Home Depot, maybe, Greg? All right. So David,
heavy, those blocks, man, make it a chain.
I'm gonna sneak one more question in here before Greg kind of starts to make sure folks know how to get in touch with you. So David, given all the change you've driven and all the initiatives you've been a part of or led, and the change you're still continuing to drive, think back if you met a David Burton, just graduated from Morgan State University, and had to give that student, with everything and more on the horizon, what one or two tips or pieces of advice would you give that new graduate?
And I would tell that graduate to understand, first of all, that their abilities, is unlimited in terms of what they can contribute to the world in general. But I think supply chain is something that I would ask and encourage that person to understand, not because I'm in supply chains, but because everything is in supply chains. And if they can grasp that, understand that, and make that part of their worldview and what they contribute, I think they have a head start in terms of the things that they can contribute to all of us. I mean, and I'm prejudiced in terms of my love for and commitment to supply chain. So I'm going to naturally be, I'm going to steer them in that direction. But
David, the point you're making is a very savvy point. It's the more consumers are naturally curious or just kind of get how end-to-end global supply chain works and why they can enjoy things in some cases same day, or if they don't like if they ordered a size too big shoes and they can put it back in the box and set it on their front door or drop it off at UPS, and then their account is just magically credited. I mean, we all win with more appreciation around this, right?
Yes, and there's so many different types of supply chains, and every company, every product around us is impacted by a supply chain. Everything we consume is impacted by supply chains.
Yeah. Speaking of which, of course, right now, speaking of consumption, we've seen a lot of conversations around the meat market. Greg has been interviewed about some of the meat concerns around that industry, and hopefully it doesn't rise to the same level of I'm afraid to pick the wrong word around toilet paper. But regardless, the silver lining here is consumers are more curious. They're going to be somewhat more aware, depending on kind of, David, to your point, what element of the world supply chain maybe they spend the most time in or are most impacted by. Greg, weigh in on what David was sharing here as we start to close.
Well, a couple things come immediately to mind, and the couple things are that regardless of who you are, well, no, let me start with regarding who you are, your ability to stand up, speak up, and stand out is much better now than it was when David Burton came out of Morgan State, right? And there's no denying that. And I think it's David's recognition. Sorry, I'm not going to talk about you like you're not here, but I don't want to talk at you. It's because of your recognition. Yeah, there you are. It's because of your recognition of that and your journey that you just described that you are enabling that so effectively for, I would argue, not only diverse manufacturers, but manufacturers in general, and young people in general now are emboldened to stand up and speak up, right, and act up.
Yes.
Like they never were when any of us were younger, right?
So true.
we were so in awe of the status quo that we were, in some ways, early on. I sense, David, you were not as much. I can tell you, I was always that smart aleck in the back of the room. But we were in awe of that. Well, we knew if we spoke up, we were in trouble. Here, if you speak up, you are heard. And I think that is a great development in the world. And you being one of the advocates for making that happen is really, really inspiring. Really appreciate what you're doing.
Absolutely agree. And, speaking from personal experience, to be the outsider, to be the first time DMSCA attendee, and to be welcomed with open arms. And this is going to sound cheesy, but there are sometimes that conversation just started, and you feel like you've been there 7 or 8 years in a row. So you've struck. There's a very interesting cultural dynamic related to the DMSCA organization, and to welcome newbies like myself is highly appreciated, and it helps drive change and improvement so much faster, right? Rather than pointing fingers, and just let's bring everybody around the table, build some rapport, and then let's have the conversations that matter, that drive action, and not lip service. So love what you're doing, Dave. Let's make sure. So Greg, let's make sure that folks know where to go.
Tell people, how can they get a hold of you?
Go to our website, DMSCA.us, and there's a link there to connect with me, ask questions. And of course, I encourage anyone to reach me on my website at DMSCA, D. Burton at DMSCA.us, D. Burton at DMSCA.us.
And you're on LinkedIn, right?
I'm on LinkedIn. So connect with me through LinkedIn or my email, and I will connect with you expeditiously.
And you'll be better off for it.
I love that word, man. He's done 3 things that I know we must have been separated at birth. Expeditiously is the third. I love that word.
What's the first 2? Greg, you can't leave me hanging.
No, we talked about the first one. I can't even remember what it was now.
I thought you were going back to align, collaborate, and achieve, which I love that.
That was number 2. I mean, if you think about it, I don't know if you've ever read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits.
Mm-hmm.
Align is seek first to understand. Collaborate is win-win or no deal, of course, and achieve is coming out of it, whatever the 7th. I'm sorry, success.
Right.
7th step, right? So
right.
It's a very sound philosophy. I like it.
Yeah, good stuff. An hour does not do your journey, nor DMSCA. You can't get into enough, but like we set out to do, to give folks an appreciation for your journey, what you're doing, how you view the world, how you view opportunities, and what you're doing to take action to help others and help improve the industry. So we love it. We look forward to having you back. DMSCA.us. And again, that is Diverse Manufacturing Supply Chain Alliance. We've been talking here with the founder and president, David Burton. And David, we look forward to having you back.
Look forward to being back and having you guys back at our next conference. I'll let you know where and when very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey, thanks so much, David. And
thank you, guys.
Hey, stick around for just a second as we wrap up this episode, and we'll make sure that the hyperlinks that David shared are in the show notes. We'll try to make it as easy as possible for folks to connect with DMSCA.
Great. Okay.
All right. So, Greg, great episode with the one and only Mr. David Burton. Again, we want to encourage people to come to our website. If you like this conversation, you'll probably like a lot of other stuff that we publish almost daily, Monday through Friday these days. Isn't that, Greg?
Yeah, it's a tough schedule. We work very, very hard.
But it's fun. It is so rewarding to sit down and spend time with folks like this interview here. So check us out at supplychainnowradio.com. Again, find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. On behalf of Greg White and our entire team here and Mr. David Burton, I hope you have a wonderful week ahead, and we'll see you next time here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.